Okay, so we're back in the scene we're working on. So the first thing I want to do is let's go back to the simple follow script that we had set up for the camera, and let's just rename this to simple follow. And I'm going to uncheck this, so we're not going to be running this state machine. Okay, and now I'm going to add a new state machine to this thing, to the main camera. Okay, and I'm going to name this follow. Okay, I want to create a variable that holds the player object. So this is my initial state, and I'm going to find object with tag, the player tag, and I'm going to store it in the player variable. And let's just double check and see if the player object has the tag, and it doesn't, so let's make sure it's got the right tag there. Okay. So when that's done, by the way, you can press Control and click on the state to quickly create the finish transition, and also Control or Command if you're on the Mac, and left click on the screen or on an empty space, then you can create a new state. Right. So in any case, here we're going to check velocity on the horizontal axis. So we are going to simply do get velocity 2D, since we're working in 2D space. Specify game object. Let's put the player object there, and we're going to put it in X, right? So we need a variable for it. So let's do float, and I'm going to call this player position X, and we're just going to put it there. We're going to do this every frame. Next, we are going to do a float sign test, which basically tests the sign of this float variable and see if it's positive or negative. Right, now I need two events to give to this action. So let's do positive velocity and negative velocity to be more exact. Just put the axis name there as well. So we're going to do, if it's positive, positive x velocity, if it's negative, negative. And let's do this every frame as well. And remember to add the transitions to the state. Okay. Now when the velocity is positive, that means the character is moving to the right of the screen. Right, so we're going to create the next state for that. I'm going to connect positive velocity to that state. Alright, so in this state, we know that the player is moving to the right. I want to get the position of the player and compare it to the screen space of, like, we want to get the screen point of the position and compare it to 0.8. Right, we want to leave 20% of margin there. So let's do that quickly here. I'm going to get position. Again, we're going to get the player position, and I need sorry, I made a mistake here. Get velocity 2D, we should be getting a velocity variable, not position. So let's change that. Let's create a new variable called player velocity x, and let's use that here instead. so it's not going to be confusing. So get velocity 2D, let's put it in velocity, player velocity x, and also we want to check player velocity x, check the sign of this variable. Okay. Now moving right, now we're going to use player position x. We're going to do it every frame. Now we have the world position of the player on the x-axis. Let's change that, convert that to screen point. Right, so let's find the world to screen point action. And the world x would be player position x, player pos x, and we need to store it in a screen position. So I'm going to call this player position x screen. Also going to do it every frame, and I want to normalize it so it gives me a number between 0 and 1. Okay. Next, I want to compare this position to a number that I define. So let's do a float compare, and we're going to compare the position of the player to 0.8, which is 80% of the screen space here, right? And if it's greater, then we're going to do something, right? We're going to send this to the next sets of states where we move the camera, and make sure we do this every frame. And let's call the transition event at edge, and let's add that to the state. So when the player is over here, we're going to send it to the next state. I'm just going to have a placeholder there. Okay. And finally, we want to make sure that if the character is moving the opposite direction, we're going to send it to a different state that handles things on the other side of the screen. So I'm just going to quickly copy the state and paste it so I can use it. I don't have to recreate some of the actions. I'm going to call this moving left. And also remember, we want to hook up this transition when the velocity is negative, meaning character is moving this way. We're going to go to that state. So again, these are all valid actions we're going to keep. But instead of comparing it to the right side of the screen, we want to compare it to the left side of the screen. And instead of greater than, we want to say, well, when it's smaller, when the position is smaller than 0.2, we're going to send the control to the next state. Okay? Okay, so that's come back to the moving right state. And now I want to get the velocity, and if it's negative, I'm going to go to this state. And I can just quickly copy these two actions, paste them here. And I don't really care if it's positive, right, because I'll just stay in this state. And if it's negative, I'm going to add the transition negative x velocity. I'm going to connect this over there. Okay, I'm going to do the same thing, copy these two, and put it down here. So if the velocity changes while in this state, we'll move it back to the moving right state. Okay, so we have those set up properly. Let's just give this a quick test before we continue. Okay, so if I'm going the right direction, it's going to be in the moving right state. If I'm moving left, it's going to the moving left state, so that's good. And if I am at the edge, now it goes to this state. and it doesn't do anything yet, so we're kind of stuck in this state, but at least that means this thing is working. Now we've determined when we're going to start moving the camera when the character is near the edges of the screen. How do we actually move the camera? Now I'm going to set up 2 states to handle that, and what it's going to do is basically, as we kind of talked about before, in the first state I'm going to find the difference, the distance that the character has moved in one frame, and in the next state I'm going to copy that difference to the camera, so the camera sort of mirrors the movement of the character, right? So let's do that. All right, so the first state I'm going to find delta, or find movement difference. Let's just call it find delta x. And here I want to define a new variable called player position x new. And what that does is I already have a player position that I got from here in the previous state, and I'm going to compare this. I'm going to use the new one and compare these two to get the distance that the character has moved. Right, so let's say I'm going to get position. Can't spell position. Get position, and I'm going to put the position into the player position x new. Right, again, in the previous state we put the position into player position x. Here, before I forget, make sure we're getting the position of the player, and we're putting that in the new variable. And I don't want to do it every frame, I just wanted to do this once. And then I'm going to find the delta, I'm going to find the difference between these two numbers so we know how much the player has moved. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to find float operator. I'm going to make sure I do that after getting the position. And I'm just going to do new position minus the old position. And I'm going to store that into a number. Let's call into a variable. I'm going to call it delta x, which is how much the character has moved on the x-axis. And once that's done, it's finished. Let's actually move camera. Right, so we get the delta on the x-axis, so how much the character has moved. And now let's move the camera using that distance. I don't want it to repeat, and I want it to be in world space. Now the reason why we don't want this to be every frame is because we're going to be looping between these two states. Right, so essentially we will be moving the camera each frame, but it's just not going to be in the same state. I mean, we will be moving the camera continuously, rather, but it's not going to be in the same state. Okay, so, and I also want to use late update. It's just I find it better to move cameras when using the late update. Okay, so that makes sure that we get the camera to follow the character. Wait, actually, I forgot one thing. This is when we want to get position again. Or we want to get the player position, the updated player position, and we're going to put it in player position X instead of the new one. And this is so that now we have a new baseline position. So when we go back to this state, the new position is we're subtracting it with the new position as well. Right, so so we get the new sort of original position, and then we get in the next frame we get the new position, and then we get the delta again. Right, so translate the camera, again get the position, and we're going to put it in player position X. And that's basically it. That's if we just play that. Once we get to the edges of the screen, you can see that the camera is moving. Or you can't see the character now, but the camera is moving with it. Let's just duplicate the floor so we have more room here. Okay. Okay, so that looks good. Now we want a way to get out of this state, because if you see, once the character gets to the right side of the screen, we go to the follow states, and they just sort of keep looping back and forth by themselves. Let me just double check. I don't think it's following quite right. So I realized the problem that we're having right now. Let me just show it to you quickly here. If we play the game, and let's just go into the state. I'm going to go and pause the game. So as you can see that we are at the move cam state, and we're moving by this number, which is calculated using these two numbers here, and that seems alright. But the problem is, because we're doing a late update, which means there's a slight delay between update and late update, we're able to see the difference. We're able to see the camera moving without running into an infinite loop problem because of that delay. Now if I get rid of that and run the game, you'll notice that we are going to have a bit of a problem. You can see that Playmaker is telling us we sort of have an infinite loop here because we're going back and forth between these two states. So what we want to do, and I realized that just now, that we actually want to make sure that we spend enough time in one of these two states. We need at least one frame of it. Right, so what was happening was we're translating it, but we got out of the state too quickly before the camera can catch up to the character. And instead of using a late update, I'm just going to use the regular update, which means we don't have to have that delay, we don't have to deal with it. So I'm going to show you this little action that I really like using, which is called, if you go to State Machine category, and then go to the next frame event. And all this does is it basically waits one frame and then goes to this event. So this makes sure that we have one frame here and one frame there. And that's all we need to do. Like if we start playing here, you see now the camera is moving nicely, and we don't have that infinite loop problem anymore because we're making sure that we have this new next frame event managing that for us. So that's great, but as you can see, once I am at the edge of the screen, the camera starts following the character, but it doesn't stop following, which is not the desired outcome. So what we need to do is basically check the velocity again, and if it's going the other direction, we want to go back to the original state where we checked velocity and see if we need to move the camera or not. So let's go to some of these original states, I'm just going to copy these two, get velocity, float sign test. So again, getting the player velocity. I don't need to do it every frame. And if the velocity is, so this is where we're going positive. If it's negative, we're going to go to the negative velocity event. And we're going to go back to where we check the velocity in the first place. Okay, and I'm just going to drag the next frame event down to the bottom again. Save. Let's give it a quick test and see if that's working. Okay, so go to the right side of the screen, it's following the character, and when I leave, when I go to the other direction, it stops following. Great. Now I just need to set it up on the other side as well, which will just mainly be copy and pasting. So I'm going to delete this for now. I'm going to copy these two states. And basically set it up the same way, except we want the opposite. So I don't need to change what's going on in the find delta state, so that's fine, because this is independent of the direction that the character is moving. And let's see, translating it, that's fine, that's fine. Right, so all I need to do is basically change the float sign test action to check for the positive velocity. I'm going to change this event to positive velocity, and if that's the case, I'm going to go back to that state. I'm going to move this around a bit to, so it's just slightly cleaner. Just cleaning this up a bit. Okay, still quite messy, but I think that should work. Let's try it. Okay, I'm moving right to the right. That works fine. And now I'm moving to the left. Oh, I think I forgot to add the physics material on that rock, but I can do that later. Okay, so it looks like it's working pretty well. Let's try the left again. Great. So that's how we can set up the camera to follow the character, to sort of scroll in the right direction at the right time. It's slightly complicated, but once we've done it a few times, it's not that complicated anymore. You just sort of get a hang of it.